What if the destiny of an entire continent rested on the vision of one man? A man who dared to imagine a free and united Africa when the world dismissed it as impossible. This is the story of Kwame Nkrumah, the teacher turned revolutionary, the dreamer turned president, the man who declared that the freedom of Ghana was meaningless unless it was linked with the freedom of Africa. Born in Nkroful, a small village in the British Gold Coast in 1909, Nkrumah grew up in a world shaped by colonial power. His mother was a simple trader, his father a goldsmith. Yet within this modest family, a future giant was taking shape. From an early age, Nkrumah showed unusual brilliance. Teachers noted his discipline, his hunger for knowledge, his sense that education was more than survival. It was liberation. But the classrooms of the Gold Coast carried a bitter irony. Children recited the glories of the British Empire, yet nothing of their own ancestors. This silence, this erasure, planted a quiet rebellion in the mind of Kwame Nkrumah. That rebellion would grow. In the 1930s, Nkrumah earned a scholarship, setting his sights far beyond the shores of Africa. In 1935, he boarded a ship bound for America. Few in his village could have imagined he would never return the same. Arriving in the United States, he entered a world of both promise and prejudice. At Lincoln University, he studied economics, sociology, and theology. By day, he was a diligent student. By night, a restless thinker, debating, questioning, searching. It was here that he encountered Pan-Africanism, the radical belief that Africans everywhere shared one destiny, and that only unity could break the chains of colonialism. These ideas electrified him. He saw colonialism not as a local wound, but a global system, one that required a bold, collective response. To survive, Nkrumah worked as a dishwasher, a janitor, even a street preacher. Yet he never complained. Every hardship, every insult became fuel for his vision of free Africa. By the early 1940s, he moved to London, immersing himself in political activism. There, he connected with other African nationalists, men and women who whispered of a day when the empire would fall. But whispers were not enough. Nkrumah's mind was already racing ahead. He wrote, "Seek ye first the political kingdom, and all else shall be added unto you." These words would become his creed, his prophecy. In 1945, in Manchester, England, Nkrumah helped organize the Fifth Pan-African Congress, a meeting that called for immediate independence across Africa. It was here that history shifted. The old world was trembling. At this Congress, young leaders like Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya and Hastings Banda of Malawi joined Nkrumah. Together, they declared colonialism must end. It was no longer a question of if, but when. But Nkrumah was not content with theory. He longed to return home, to the Gold Coast, to turn ideals into action. In 1947, that chance came. He was invited to be secretary of the United Gold Coast Convention, a political party demanding independence. His arrival electrified the movement. Charismatic, fiery, and relentless, Nkrumah spoke directly to the people, not in lofty colonial English, but in simple, urgent words. Farmers, workers, market women, they listened, and they believed. But his passion soon clashed with the older, cautious leaders of the UGCC. They wanted gradual reforms. He wanted immediate independence. Conflict was inevitable. When protests broke out in 1948, riots swept the streets. The colonial government arrested Nkrumah and his colleagues. The British thought a prison cell would silence him. But they were wrong. Behind bars, his influence only grew. Crowds shouted his name, demanding his release. Nkrumah, once a village boy, was now the symbol of a nation's awakening. Nkrumah's imprisonment in 1948 was meant to end his influence. Instead, it turned him into a martyr. Across the Gold Coast, people whispered his name as though it carried freedom itself. But Nkrumah's vision no longer fit inside the cautious framework of the UGCC. While they debated constitutional reforms, he burned with urgency. Independence, he believed, could not wait. So, Nkrumah broke away, founding his own party, the Convention People's Party, the CPP. Its slogan was simple, electrifying: self-government now. The CPP was unlike anything before. It was not a party of elites. It was the People's Party, of farmers, of traders, of workers. Nkrumah spoke their language, walked their streets, shared their struggles. His rallies were thunderous spectacles. With fiery speeches, he transformed frustration into movement, and movement into momentum. A tidal wave was building, and the colonial government could feel it. Alarmed, the British struck back. In 1950, after a wave of boycotts and strikes, they arrested Nkrumah again, sentencing him to prison. This time, they were certain they had crushed the CPP. But history was moving faster than the empire. In 1951, the Gold Coast held its first general election. From his prison cell, Nkrumah ran for office and won in a landslide. The message was undeniable. The people had chosen their leader even behind bars. The colonial government had no choice but to release him. That day, prison walls could no longer contain him. He was appointed leader of government business, the closest role yet to prime minister. The tide of independence was now irreversible. But the struggle was not only political, it was personal. Nkrumah's rise demanded sacrifice, years in exile, time in prison, and a life perpetually shadowed by threats. Yet he pressed forward, relentless. The British still hoped to slow the march. They offered gradual reforms, partial autonomy, calculated delays. But Nkrumah's voice grew louder. Ghana would settle for nothing less than full freedom. By 1954, Nkrumah was elected prime minister. The momentum was unstoppable. Across Africa, eyes turned to the Gold Coast. Could this small colony become the first black African nation to break free? The British knew they were losing their grip. Negotiations intensified. Nkrumah demanded not promises, but a date. A day when the Gold Coast would step into the light of independence. Finally, the date was set. March 6, 1957. On that night, under the dark Accra sky, Kwame Nkrumah stood before a sea of faces, tears and cheers blending into history. He declared, "At long last the battle has ended, and thus Ghana, your beloved country, is free forever." His voice thundered through the crowd, echoing across Africa. But listen closely, for he added something more. Our independence is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of Africa. In that moment, Nkrumah turned Ghana's freedom into a continental mission. For millions across Africa, this was not just Ghana's day. It was the dawn of a new era, a signal that empires could fall and that a united Africa was possible. Nkrumah became the face of African independence, the proof that liberation was not a dream, but destiny. Young activists from Nigeria to Kenya,
from South Africa to Algeria drew strength from Ghana's victory. But triumph brought new challenges. Independence was only the beginning. Could one man turn a colonial economy into a modern nation? Could Ghana survive the storms ahead? Kwame Nkrumah had won freedom, but the real battle, to build, to unite, to sustain, was only beginning. The story of Ghana's independence was the prologue to the story of Africa's struggle for unity.
March 6, 1957 was more than a national celebration. It was a continental turning point. Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African nation to win independence, and Kwame Nkrumah, its first prime minister, carried the hopes of millions. To Nkrumah, independence was not the end, it was the beginning. He envisioned Ghana as a shining model, a nation that would prove Africa's capacity for modernity, dignity, and self-rule. He launched bold projects, new schools, universities, factories, and most famously, the Volta River Project, a massive dam to power Ghana's future. He believed infrastructure was the backbone of freedom. But Nkrumah was not content with Ghana alone. He declared that Ghana's destiny was tied to Africa's destiny. He dreamed of a United States of Africa, one army, one currency, one government. At conferences across the continent, he urged leaders, "Seek ye first the political kingdom, and all else will be added unto you." His words ignited hope, but also revealed divisions among Africa's new leaders. Some saw him as a prophet of unity, others feared his ambition. Could one man truly unite a continent fractured by language, borders, and colonial scars? Meanwhile, Ghana was becoming a symbol of freedom worldwide. Nkrumah welcomed Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and global revolutionaries to Accra. Ghana was no longer a colony, it was the heartbeat of Black liberation. But power is a double-edged sword. As his vision expanded, so did the pressures. The Cold War was tightening its grip. The United States and the Soviet Union both courted Ghana and watched Nkrumah closely. Nkrumah sought to balance East and West, refusing to be a puppet, but neutrality was dangerous. To both superpowers, neutrality often looked like betrayal. Inside Ghana, challenges multiplied. Rapid industrialization drained the treasury. Farmers, especially cocoa growers, felt neglected as their profits were redirected into state projects. And then came the critics. Some whispered that Nkrumah was moving too fast. Others accused him of building a personality cult, his image appearing on coins, stamps, and monuments. Security threats also grew. Assassination attempts shook his government. Bombs exploded at rallies. Each brush with death pushed Nkrumah toward tighter control, fueling accusations of authoritarianism. In response, he passed preventative detention laws, allowing imprisonment without trial. Supporters saw it as necessary for stability, critics saw it as betrayal of democracy. It was a tragic irony. The man who fought colonial chains now faced accusations of chaining his own people in the name of progress. Meanwhile, his Pan-African vision stretched Ghana's resources thin. He poured money into liberation movements abroad, from Algeria to Congo, determined to see Africa free. But at home, patience was running out. Economic hardship deepened. The glow of independence was fading into disillusionment. Foreign powers watched closely. To the CIA, MI6, and others, Nkrumah's radical Pan-Africanism looked less like liberation and more like a threat to Western interests. Plots began to stir, enemies within, rivals abroad, superpowers playing chess, and Nkrumah's Ghana was becoming the board. In 1964, Nkrumah declared Ghana a one-party state, believing unity was essential for survival. To his critics, it confirmed their worst fears. The liberator was becoming a dictator. The man who once embodied Africa's rising sun now stood at the edge of a storm, and soon that storm would break. By the mid-1960s, Ghana was restless. Prices soared, shortages spread, and whispers of discontent echoed across the land. Foreign intelligence agencies had already marked Nkrumah as a threat. Inside Ghana, rivals plotted. The liberator's circle was tightening. Then came 1966, and Nkrumah left Ghana on a peace mission to Hanoi, seeking to mediate the Vietnam War. While he was away, the storm finally struck. On February 24th, soldiers and police officers seized power. In Accra, gunfire echoed. The dream of the First Republic crumbled overnight. Nkrumah's statues were toppled, his books banned. The man who had declared Ghana free was now exiled, unwanted in the nation he birthed. When he learned of the coup, he wept. Betrayal had come not from foreign invaders, but from his own military. Guinea offered him refuge. President Sékou Touré named him honorary co-president, but even in exile, his heart beat for Ghana and for Africa. He never gave up his Pan-African mission. From abroad he wrote passionately, urging unity, warning against neocolonialism, and dreaming of a continental awakening. But exile was cruel. Cut off from power, his health declined. In 1972, Nkrumah fell gravely ill, and the man who once stood as Africa's giant now faced his final days. On April 27, 1972, Kwame Nkrumah died in a Bucharest hospital. He was only 62. Ghana mourned, Africa mourned, the world mourned. In Ghana, even those who had overthrown him came to realize his vision was bigger than politics. It was the heartbeat of a continent. Today, his mausoleum in Accra stands not just as a tomb, but as a temple to African independence. Visitors walk among his statues, feeling the weight of his unfinished dream. Was he flawed? Yes. Did he make mistakes? Absolutely. But greatness is not perfection. Greatness is the courage to imagine the impossible and fight for it. Kwame Nkrumah imagined Africa not as a victim but as a force, united, industrialized, and free. That vision still echoes, waiting to be realized. His famous words ring truer than ever. Africa must unite. In a world of globalization, climate crisis, and economic struggles, unity may be Africa's greatest weapon. For today's generation, Nkrumah's story is a lesson. Dream boldly, but ground your vision in the people's needs. Without balance, even the brightest star can burn out. His life teaches resilience. His downfall teaches humility. His dream teaches hope. And together, they form a compass for Africa's future. Nkrumah once said, "I am not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me." Those words remain an anthem for every African dreamer. From the Gold Coast to Accra, from Accra to the whole world, Nkrumah's legacy burns like a flame that refuses to die. He may have fallen in exile, but his vision lives on. For every young African who dares to dream, Nkrumah still whispers across time, "Forward ever, backward never."